Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on religion versus spirituality. I'll wait a few minutes to let everyone jump on. We'll see. I see all of you are coming in, so we'll give it a minute or two. And my name is Shauna, and I am with Chrysalis Way. We started a sex and love addiction program because we felt there was a need for it. So after being able to see how much is needed, these webinars have come up a little bit more just because there are topics that people don't usually talk about, and I wanted to bring a little bit of awareness. So I'll explain a little bit about where I'm coming from. Ellie Nash, who actually is on tonight, did a webinar on porn addiction called Exit Strategy. And afterwards, there were people reaching out saying, we need help. Can you help us? And we didn't know where to send them. And that's when I realized we needed to help these people. So I reached out to Faith Niece, who's on as well. And she said, absolutely, let's do it. So we've spent a couple of months putting together a program for sex and love addiction, and it's been successful. So that's really how we ended up here today. This webinar is something that near and dear to my heart. It's a topic that comes up often. I almost feel like everyone I meet, there's something about this that talks to them. And I'm excited to see how we can have a discussion about religion versus spirituality and are they compatible? So I'll just go around real quickly and introduce each of the panelists, and then we can get started. I'll start off with Rabbi Jacobson. Rabbi Jacobson, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Thank you very much, Anna, for doing this. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with the co-panelists, Ellie, RJ, Faith, and you, Shauna. And I also am excited about this topic. You know, growing up in a intensely religious home and community, there was always in my own heart and soul something lacking when I saw the dogma and stuff like judgmentalism and condescension. And it was when I discovered the spirituality, when I heard the music, so to speak, is when it really, my soul began to soar. So I'm really glad to be here. I mean, I am the author of Toward a Meaningful Life. I direct and head the Meaningful Life Center, which bridges spiritual and secular, but at the same time, it fuses it also with timeless faith and religion and tradition. So I'm really glad to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'll now introduce Faith Niece. Faith, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, so nice to be here tonight. My name is Faith Niece. I'm a mental health counselor, marriage and family therapist, and CSAT therapist. And I'm also with Shauna, started Chrysalis Way with Hope Street, which is a virtual sex and love addiction treatment program. I have been a therapist for almost 7 years now, which is so strange to be saying out loud. But I've been a spiritual seeker for a lot longer than that, probably since I was a young kid trying to find meaning and purpose, and for a long time struggled with what I wanted to believe or what I thought was the right thing to believe. And after a long time of examining different religions and my own spiritual journey, I also ended up working a lot with people's spirituality and their religious upbringing in my private practice with clients. And so there's both the personal and the professional side to this topic that I'm really invested in. And as anybody who in recovery knows that it's a spiritual solution to an addictive issue. And so that's a big part of our program at Chrysalis Way, is helping people find their own spiritual journey and also find their own religious journey. And the two intersect, even though sometimes they're not always, as Rabbi was saying, they're not always hand in hand until we do our own seeking. So I'm really happy to be talking about this. I'm sure anybody who's joining is on their own path, and I'm glad that we can be part of it with you guys.
Thank you, Faith. I appreciate that. And RJ, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, good evening. My name is RJ Garcia. I'm in the Austin, Texas area. I'm a therapist, actually an interventionist, a therapist, and an optimized coach, and have been following really the 12 wisdom steps for the past 33 years. Prior to that, practicing spirituality through my life. And I really like the whole unifying of the principles of the 12 steps. And then I kind of look at all different aspects of recovery, from the 12-step facilitation model to Dharma recovery, to atheist, people who may not believe in God, but they want to have some type of humanistic spiritual program. And so I'm totally excited about having this conversation with you and with the panelists this evening, and look forward to learning from each other tonight.
Thank you, RJ. And Ellie Nash, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good. Good evening, everyone. Glad to be invited to this important, interesting discussion. I grew up not too far from Rabbi Jacobson, I think, so I'm familiar with the religion. I didn't hear the music, so not coming from my house, I didn't find it. And it wasn't loud enough in Rabbi Jacobson's house then for me to hear it. Today I'm a business owner. I live in Miami. Some may know me for a talk I've done called Escaping Porn Addiction, which is in some ways what led me to do the webinar that Shana spoke about earlier, Exit Strategy of Porn Addiction. So I found my spirituality in porn, or in recovery from addiction, in a lot of ways. And I think I'm here today more to learn than to share, but I'm certainly happy to share my own questions and confusion around the subject as well. So excited to start.
Thank you, Ellie. I'm excited. I know we have a great group of panelists. I could not have asked for a better group. I think one of the things that I look for when I try to pull together a group are people that can be nice and understanding, even if we don't agree. So I have no doubt that no matter what we come up with, we will end off as friends. And that's the goal. I just want to take 1 minute and thank Lauren Hawk for helping to pull this together. Lauren, do you want to say a few words?
Lauren, you're on mute.
Thank you that I was on mute. Can y'all hear me okay? Hi, everybody. Sorry, my name is Lauren Houck. I live in Austin, Texas, with that giant star in the background. You can tell. I worked in the field in the behavioral health, addiction, mental health treatment field for over 16 years now. Working for different providers along the way. I worked for one residential treatment provider that treats all addictions, including sex and love addiction. And, going to the conferences and whatnot, I'm like, oh, well, there's a name for that. It's called sex and love addiction. And started my treatment journey in 2014. It was very difficult, emotional, road. Getting into recovery from sex and love addiction. And even before that, being diagnosed at age 19 with obsessive compulsive disorder, and even, thus making this my career, I've had some things to overcome. So we're talking about, religion versus spirituality. I know for me, stumbling across the 12 steps and, working a program that it's taught me more than, I ever could have known I could have learned about, a meaningful life. Yes, I'm in recovery from sex and love addiction, but I still live with an OCD, which is a chronic neuropsychiatric disorder, and, bringing those useful things, spirituality into my life, living with OCD are definitely very, very helpful for me. So anyways, I'm glad to be here. And now I do consulting. So yeah, I'm just glad to be here. And thank you, Shauna, for all your hard work and putting these together too.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that. And now getting ready to jump right into it. Religion versus spirituality. And our format is pretty flexible. Feel free to jump in if you have something to add. If you don't want to, feel free to pass. And that's to all the panelists. And whoever's attending, feel free to put your questions in the question and answer box, and we'll try to address it as well. So the first thing that I guess starting with the basics is defining religion and defining spirituality. How are they the same? How are they different? Does anyone want to jump in about that a little bit?
I'll start. Am I considered the most religious person on this panel? Let's make that, maybe we should figure that out.
I think you have a rabbi before your name. I'm not sure.
I may look the part, but don't be deceived by looks. This is actually, for me, was a real conflict for many years in my life until I came to a reconciliation. Because just to begin with a statistics show that over 90% of Americans believe in some form of spirituality and God, and only 40% associate with a religion. That's a pretty big discrepancy. And I think one of the reasons for this is that if you ask most people, and I've done this with many audiences and individuals that I've met, if you ask most people to define religion, the knee-jerk reaction to religion, they would say words like this. We'll start with the more innocent words and then get to the more aggressive ones. Things like community, tradition, ritual, prayer, house of worship, clergy. And then when you go a little further, religion associated with words like punishment, anger, guilt, fear, punitiveness, condescension, judgmentalism. Just watch any Woody Allen movie and you'll have all the rich stereotypes of what religion is. Closed-mindedness. To use one example in one of Woody Allen's movies, where this atheist woman says to her religious grandfather at the Seder table, the Passover Seder table, she says, "Grandpa, you're so fanatic that if you had to choose between God and the truth, which one would you choose?" And without missing a beat, the pious grandfather says, "Of course, God or the truth." So there's that approach to religion. And of course, when you look at the history of religion and a lot of the abuse in the name of religious power till this very day, so it's very clear that many people don't want to have anything to do with it. Even the beautiful parts of it are at best, as I said, ritual community. Spiritual, on the other hand, is the words that people associate with spiritual is free-spiritedness, soul, music, transcendence, open-mindedness, soaring, love. So you can see they're not just two different words. They actually reflect very antithetical approaches. So growing up in a religious home, and I have to say, it was not a dogmatic home, which was the saving grace, I came to realize that there's two parts to the experience. One is the mechanics, and the other is the soul behind it. And I mentioned before the music. And unfortunately, most people who've experienced religion see it as mechanical, as technical at best, and do not feel the soul in it, and therefore go off elsewhere to search for spirituality. In my case, I have found ways to fuse it. I'm sure we'll talk about it some more. I don't want to hog the time, but I just thought it's a good way to put context. And I see it like a body and soul, with religion being a healthy religion, being the mechanics, and the spirituality being the energy or the spirit within those mechanics.
Yeah, I'll hop in and piggyback a little bit off of that, Rabbi, because whenever I explain the difference to clients, I always use this analogy that actually my dad taught me. Because when I'm talking to clients who are asking about 12-step and addiction and recovery and what does it mean to be spiritual by the context of being a person in recovery, the way it was explained to me by my father was like, it's like the Force from Star Wars. Spirituality is like this force that you can either use your powers for good or you can use your powers for evil. And are you choosing to tap into the light or the good force, as like Luke Skywalker finds, or the evil or the dark, like Darth Vader? And that's how he explained it to me as a kid. And that there are forces beyond our comprehension and what we can see, and it's how we use it that is basically the impact that we can have with it. And so, I mean, technically speaking, the way I would define religion is a set of dogmatic principles that guide a person's lifestyle, maybe their dress, the way that they choose to express themselves around holidays or families, or what's important to them. Some of the terms that use ritual, community, whereas spirituality is a much more personal preference, and like you were talking about the body and soul of it, like where religion might be the act, the spirituality behind it is my intention in which I do the act. And I think a lot of times, especially for myself, when I was exploring that difference between what is religion versus spirituality, I thought that they had to go hand in hand, and I thought that anything spiritual had to be something religious. And for me personally, the resentments that I had with religion made me want to reject spirituality. And when I found out that they were two separate things, I was able to have a better relationship with both of them. And I think I'm really glad that we're starting off with defining this, because it's a huge point.
I'll jump in. So I've heard someone say that religion is for people who don't want to go to hell, and spirituality is for people who've been there. So I certainly, that resonates with me, because at first I rejected, through adolescence and early adulthood, I rejected religion and by extension, any sort of spirituality. So I wasn't in that camp. I guess I was in the 10% camp from what Rabbi Jacobson explained earlier. I wasn't spiritual, but not religious. I was not spiritual and not religious, at least the way I identified. Today, I'm not sure. I look at it a little differently. Today, I'm not sure how someone could not identify as them as spiritual. I'm not sure what it means to not identify as spiritual. It's like I can not identify as having an arm, but I still have an arm. So I'm not as closely connected with that terminology anymore. But what I would say for myself, my own journey, is I've separated between three different things: religion, organized religion, and spirituality. And I'm not 100% sure that spirituality can be combined or is compatible with organized religion, but I am finding more and more that it could be compatible with religion itself. One of the things I found was I've been to different meetings, different 12 steps meetings, and in early recovery, the chip system was a disaster for me. It was everything it wasn't supposed to do. Early on, I got 60 days sober. I remember slipping, and once I slipped, I said, "F it, let me get my money's worth." And this became this obsession of mine: how many days I can string together, and if I didn't string enough days together, then I'm starting again. And this whole really negative idea. So I, in speaking to my sponsor, he said to me, "Recovery is is not to be worn like a straitjacket. Wear it like a loose garment. If you don't like the chips, don't do the chips." So I said, "Okay." A few days later, I was asked to volunteer to do the chips, or a short time later. And when I was doing the chips, I used the expression, "Some of us choose to use a chip system to help people with recovery." And some of the people in the room didn't like the "some of us" that I chose. And what I realized, without going through the whole story, what I realized is that even 12 steps, which was almost created in order to smash dogma and give a list of suggestions that people can follow, dogma is attracted to people, not to ideas. So people just jump in right away. And what I responded, I said, find me in the literature, find me anywhere where there's any rules. It's all suggestions, number one. And number two, find me in the literature where it says anything about chips. but people gravitate to that. And what it did for me, that interaction, is it allowed me to believe that some of this happened in religion also, that Moses at Sinai, or Jesus, or Muhammad, or whatever religion it was, I don't think it started with a set of laws. I think it probably started to smash dogma in many cases. And certainly the Baal Shem Tov, the Hasidic master, that's what he came to smash dogma. And in the end, a lot of things become dogmatic. So that's my conclusion. Spirituality, religion, and organized religion. I think we need all three distinctions in my case.
You should add a fourth category, Ellie, disorganized religion.
That might be spirituality.
Thank you, everyone. That was really clear, and I feel like we got right into it. There's so much more than just religion and spirituality. And Ellie, thank you for bringing up that there's different parts of religion. And I think that's where we get a little lost on it's all or nothing. And that would bring up my next question is it all or nothing? Can you be religious and not spiritual? Can you be spiritual and not religious? How are they intertwined? Are they mutually exclusive, or are they interdependent?
I began last time, maybe someone else, and we'll go a different order. Or...
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm RJ. I stayed quiet in the first one, so I can answer the first question. And the first question for me is, I Googled it, and that's what it says. What's the difference between religion and spirituality? So when I Google that, that's the first thing that pops up. And then the way I define it, because of my experience, it's this, right? Spirituality to me means unity, not only with self, but with others, my past, my present, my future, the eternal universe, and that it's an internal journey. I can't measure your spirituality, just like in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says the only desire for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And when it first got started, it was, an honest desire. How the hell do you measure an honest desire, much less a desire, right? And so people can come in, and I always like to say, if somebody comes in and they're smelling like alcohol, yay, they have a desire to stop drinking. They're not disrupting the group. If they're disrupting the group, then we have to pull them to the side and give them some coffee and love on them the best that we can. Religion for me means an opportunity to learn from sacred wisdoms. I can use those sacred wisdoms if I choose to. I grew up Catholic. I was baptized Catholic. I'm still a Catholic. In the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll hear people say I'm a recovering Catholic. No. I just don't follow the dogma. I've always had a relationship with God. My relationship with God was me following that little voice in my head, not believing it. It was not loud enough, but believing it that I needed to do something about my drinking. And it was really because of my grandmother who died of alcoholism, that the spiritualness in me, my spiritual health, my spiritual awareness was that that's going to happen to me. And my grandmother died at 74, not knowing that she was really dying of alcoholism. She was so gone. And I was 25 years old, and I realized I better do something, because this is an ugly thing to say, but I was spitting out black loogies like color of my shirt. I was smoking so much marijuana. So by the time I was 25, I burned the candles on all fingers and their two thumbs. And it was up to me if I was going to do anything. And spiritually, what ended up happening is not only did my grandmother die, but I was taking two classes at Texas State University, and one of them was death and dying, and the other one was abnormal psychology. And you got to understand, I have severe dyslexia, so I'm not really academically inclined. I'm not stupid, just can't make that kind of grade. And so, but the death and dying class allowed me to grow spiritually, because it started showing me the aspects of mortality and realizing that I'm not going to be here forever. And what kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? And I'm not a great example of that, of what legacy I want to leave behind, but I'm working on it. And I think that's the beauty of the second, the third, the 100th, the 1000th chance that we can give each other through spirituality, and realize that we're all connected, like it or not. And that's a reality that I need to accept. You know, I didn't grow up Jewish, but you're my Jewish brother and sister, right? I didn't grow up Muslim, but you're my Muslim brother and sister, right? And so for me, I'm grateful that I can see that today. And I think for me, it gives me then the opportunity to meet people from all over the world and have friendships and relationships and talk about the aspects of the 12 steps and the aspects of their own spiritual growth, and then ask them, are they compatible? Are they not compatible? For me, they're compatible, but that doesn't necessarily it means for you. And I'm okay if it doesn't mean that for you. I respect it. I'm not right or wrong. I'm just telling you what I know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, RJ. I think what I see the most often is that when there's religion without spirituality is when I see people in the most pain, and it's when I experience the most pain for myself. And I think that's sort of where this talk comes in, because anybody with an addiction is looking for something outside of us to make us feel better about ourselves, right? And so we're likely to be trying all sorts of things to fix this hole that we're feeling inside. And I think it can be really easy to try to practice a set of religious values in the hopes that it'll make me a spiritual person without understanding the spiritual connection behind the religious practice that I might be doing. And so I see this a lot with clients where it's like, I do everything that I'm supposed to do according to how I was taught as a kid, or how I was taught by the people that I'm mentored by spiritually or religiously, and I still don't feel good. I don't feel a connection. I don't feel better. And I still continue to act out in ways that make me feel worse about myself, even though I'm doing all the right things to be religious enough. And I don't think there's any religious enough. I think that when we're chasing it, am I good enough? Is it enough? I'm doing that addictive behavior of hoping that something outside of me is going to make the inside of me feel good enough. And that if I don't have that spiritual component, there's nothing that I can do enough of to make me feel differently inside, other than probably worse, from my experience with clients and personal experience with seeking things outside myself to try to feel better. So I think that it's very, of course, religion can happen without spirituality. Spirituality can happen without religion. And I think what I noticed from my personal experience is both kind of left a vacuum. I think this is totally personal, and everybody has their own journey. And putting aside my clinical hat for a second and taking my personal hat, my spiritual journey led me into being more religious, which if somebody would have told me that at 18, 19, 25, I would have laughed at them. Because I was so against organized religion and so into that the spirituality being an organic process that shouldn't have a set of rules or guidelines. But what I found in my process is that spirituality actually brought me to a understanding of religion that is meaningful and personal, and that I enjoy practicing in. And when Rabbi was like, am I the most religious one here? I shook my head. I know you guys can't see me if I'm not muted, because as a convert, I think I probably am considered the most crazy religious person here. But I'm proud of that, because it wasn't a decision that I took upon myself lightly, because I found that the combination of spirituality and religion can bring such a meaningful thing, but either one of them individually left me wanting more. So while they can exist independently, I think that when they exist together, there's something really beautiful that happens. But I think that my process doesn't have to be everybody else's, and that they can have just religion or just spirituality without the other while they're on their journey.
Shauna, can you explain the question again? The all or nothing is what all or nothing?
Sure. It actually was a question that came in. The question was, are spirituality and religion mutually exclusive, or perhaps are they interdependent? So I think the question really is like, do we need both, or can you just focus on one? Does that answer it a little bit?
I think so. I think it looks like Robert Jacobson is ready to jump in.
Actually, I wanted to hear what you had to say, Ellie, first, but either way.
Then I'll go. Okay, I'll jump in. I can talk from my own experience in terms of religion and spirituality, and what Faith said about becoming more religious through spirituality. To some degree, I found that, in the last few years, I've taken on certain practices that I didn't imagine taking on previously, but I'm certainly by no means prescriptive about it. There was a time where I found, for example, putting on the tefillin and praying every morning, this is going back 15 or so years ago, that the days I didn't do it, I felt guilt. And what made the most sense to me, and I think it was the best decision, was to stop putting it on for as long as possible until the guilt disappeared. And it took a couple of years. And now I probably do it 90% of the days that the law prescribes. And the ones I don't, I have no guilt. And the ones I do, I feel pretty good about. I'll share a story that happened a few weeks ago. A friend of mine who's, I guess, would consider himself modern Orthodox, if those titles make any sense, put me on his shidduch resume. So as a, what do you call it? As a reference. So he had mentioned that he's Shomer Shabbos, or he wants to observe the Sabbath. But I guess in conversation, it came up that he also likes to golf on the Sabbath, which meant that he may get in a car, or he may have to do something, maybe a friend drives him, but he used a term that he was Sabbath observant. So they challenged me that how can he say that he's Sabbath observant if he does X, Y, or Z? So I said, listen, a few years ago, I made a decision to no longer work on Sabbath. Last year, I made a decision to no longer drive on the Sabbath. But I do other things. I use my phone on the Sabbath. I do other things as well, but I'm observing it in some way. I said, I don't know if you know, there's a law that you're not supposed to talk about, correct me if I'm wrong, Rabbi, that you're not supposed to talk about certain work activities on the Sabbath. I said, if someone violated that law, in your mind, it's okay. In my mind, it's something else. I said, so we're all choosing definitions. And the way I look at it today in my own life, what's worked for me is not to look at any of these things as laws. I had to get rid of the guilt and the punishment, but more as this is the ideal. There's an ideal for everything. There's an ideal for weight loss. There's an ideal for eating. There's an ideal for eating is a good example, right? If you'll get the benefit from eating well, but the people who are crazy about it, I don't know, maybe lose even some of the benefits of eating well. But if you eat 90% well, you're better off than if you don't, and no one strikes you down. You just get a few more calories in your system.
Okay, so I struggled when I was in my younger teenage years and even younger with this issue, even though at that point I probably didn't have the language to express it. But in retrospect, when I look back, I struggled with this issue heavily, because I saw all around me, the yeshiva, the school I went to, community, standards, very strict standards. I remember my uncles, they were so fanatically religious. I can't even tell you. I remember once sitting at a Seder table, my grandparents' Seder table, and I was maybe 7 years old. And there's a point when you drink the cup of wine, you eat the matzah, you're supposed to recline. You recline, it's a sign of freedom. And I remember my uncle, who was probably 17 years old, he looks at me and he says, you're not reclining enough. And he starts telling me, you have to recline. He starts hitting my head. He says, recline, you got to recline. I said, why do you have to recline? He says, it's freedom, 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 freedom. He's knocking me on my head. He's forcing me to be free. And I remember as a child, children, again, I didn't have the words, but it was comical. It was ridiculous to me. He's so religious about it, they forgot what the word freedom is. And he's a very good guy. Years later, I would laugh about it with him. And so I grew up with a lot of that. And I struggled with it because it bothered me, to be very honest. And I hope it doesn't sound too irreverent. I actually developed very anti-religious feelings. That was really what I was hinting to, because I saw many religious people, fine people, but there's a real dichotomy and disconnect between their traditions and rituals and their humanity. There's this classic one, which I don't like to bring up, but it's painful. So there was a husband, wife, had many guests at the table, and it was Friday night dinner. So the custom is you make a blessing on wine, kiddush. And while the kiddush is being made, the challah, which is the bread, is covered up. Now, for whatever reason, the wife who had set the table, she forgot to put a cover on the challah. And the husband, who was an angry man above all, began in front of people, in front of the guests, humiliating her. What's the matter with you? You know, with the body language and his words, he insulted her basically, shamed her in front of everyone, why she didn't put the cover, the challah cover. The guests, many of them were not familiar with this whole thing, but they saw how he behaved. And on the other hand, he's piously saying Kiddush. After they wash their hands, they come to sit down and break bread and cut the challah. So one of the individuals at the guest of the table was more knowledgeable than he let on. And he says to the man, to the husband, he says, let me ask you, why do you cover? I saw you made a big fuss about the covering on the challah. He says, you cover the challah not to embarrass it when you're making kiddush on wine. He said, so let me understand exactly. So embarrassing your wife, that's not a problem. But embarrassing the challah, that's what's bothering you. Which, of course, captures this almost absurdity of being religious and forgetting to be a human being. That the word love, I think we should introduce here. When Hillel was asked by the potential convert, tell me, teach me the entire Torah standing on one foot. You know what he answered? Don't do unto others that which you don't want done to yourself. That's the entire Torah, and everything else is commentary. So Rab Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad Chassidus, the author of the Tanya, asks a very powerful question. What does that mean? What about Shabbat, prayer? Yes, you can say all the mitzvahs, all the good deeds that are between human being to human being fall under the rubric, don't do unto others. Or in other words, love your fellow as yourself, the positive side of it. But how could you say all the laws between you and God? And his answer is, because the entire Torah, even Shabbos and even kosher, and even the so-called rituals are all about transcendence, and transcendence equals love, the dominance of spirit over matter. So sadly and tragically, and I have to say that for the record, it's very important to state, very many religious communities and people have a very distorted version of religion, frankly. This is what I came to discover, that Abraham and Moses and Sarah and Rivka and all the great Jewish men and women throughout history of faith, they were, I think Ellie mentioned that before, they were above all people of love, of selflessness, of humility. And they created a spiritual revolution. And part of that, there's a mechanic part of that. Unfortunately, through history, and here's not maybe the time to analyze it, but there was a split between the ritual and the spiritual. And people became more committed to the actions and forgot why they're doing it. And therefore, you could have someone that keeps Shabbos technically, but is not Shabbosdik, eats kosher, but is not a kosher person. To the point that Nachmanides writes that you can be a manuvel, an obnoxious person, all in the cloak of religion. So religion could actually end up being a destructive force when it's lacking the soul, the heart, and the love. And I think many, many people, I've met thousands personally, who have been alienated, not just Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so on, due to this recognizing that they're not interested in just following mechanics when there's no love and there's no heart and soul. And you come away with the impression that religion has nothing to do with the heart and soul. And you reject it. Now, thank God, I did come to discover that they are a hand and a glove. But at the end of the day, I would say religion without spirituality is, I don't want to use a morbid term, but it's like a corpse, a body without a soul. Period.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everyone. Rabbi, you touched on, a little bit on my next topic that I want to bring up. And I think it's interesting because what I'm noticing is that we all grow up, we learn from others. And spirituality and religion is not really something that you could learn. It's something you have to find for yourself. And we're all taught the rules, we're taught what we should know, but until we actually find it, it's empty. There's nothing there. So I love that you're bringing up a little bit about that, because like everyone, like following in line with what everyone's saying is they had to find it themselves. And I love that that got brought up. My next question, and Rabbi, you touched on this a little bit, is how does it work if someone is religious in certain traditions, but immoral, or spiritual, but in certain areas they're unethical? Like you have someone, you know, that's cheating on their taxes, but they're super religious, or, you know, they're very spiritual, but they're sleeping with their neighbor. Like, how does that work? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, all of you.
I vote that Ellie start with this one.
Go, Ellie.
I got it. So in terms of spirituality, I know a lot of people who speak positively about spirituality. It's not all good. Demons are spiritual too. There's a dark side to spirituality as well. I've certainly seen, I mean, I've involved myself in a lot of different communities, some Jewish, some not. And spirituality can become, there's a good dose of arrogance that comes from spirituality, just I don't want to say in its purest form, but it's not all it's cracked up to be, because people aren't all they're cracked up to be. In terms of religion itself, it depends who's asking the question about being religion and not spiritual. So if a religious person is, if I'm speaking to them, then I'll say it's a contradiction. Like, you're religious and you're doing something immoral. But if someone else who's not religious is pointing at that person, I'll answer it very differently. And I don't know that it's a contradiction. Why does suddenly, because someone chooses to be part of a community, or, you know, who knows why they're religious, quote unquote, 95% of the time it's for a community. Why are they suddenly held to higher standards than everyone else? And I think it's it's something that I think is not wonderful in society, is that certain people can be punched at and certain people can't be punched at. So we can punch at someone who's making money and stealing, but we can't punch at someone who doesn't have that much money and stealing. We can punch at a person who's at the top of the food chain, but we can't punch at people in the bottom of the food chain. We can punch at people who are religious and immoral, but we can't punch at people who are not religious and immoral. I think we can have certain standards that we hold everyone to. Inclusion, I don't see a contradiction between being religious and not being spiritual. But if I was talking to someone who was heavily invested in that life, I would point out the contradiction. In terms of the meaning, Rabbi Jacobson, you mentioned the story of the bread and the bread. I've had a lot of similar experiences, and there's one that comes to mind. So here's the way I may call someone out. I was invited to be the sandik at a bris of a 35-year-old gentleman who decided to get circumcised, which is not very common, but there's a certain tradition to hold. It's a special thing to hold the person who's getting the circumcision. Obviously, with a 35-year-old man, you don't actually hold them. You stand behind them while there's a sheet in front of you, and you hold their head while the ceremony is done. So I'm sitting with a few people in the outside waiting room while this is happening, and there was one gentleman who was not less than 300 pounds sitting there. And I don't know what I said about organic food or a different kind of food, and I'm certainly not the picture of health, but next to this guy I was. And he started laughing at the idea of organic food and how silly it is. And I don't know, he was putting it down. And I turned to him and I said, but you're kosher. You're kosher, for goodness sakes. You're obviously saying that there's some difference between things that we don't, especially in food, but in all things, that are not necessarily perceived immediately upon seeing it. What's the difference if the animal was killed, shot in the head, or if it was cut with a flat knife or a super smooth knife? Somehow one is good and one is bad, but you can't understand a banana which was sprayed with pesticides or one that wasn't sprayed with pesticides. I mean, just to laugh at that. So in terms of that, yes, like I said, it depends who I'm talking to. That guy deserves a flick in the air. Someone who's making fun of him also deserves a flick in the air. That's what I got. Even me.
It's hard to do virtually.
Yeah, virtual flicks in the ear. I think this question comes up a lot because I think as humans, this is my observation, is that myself and others included, we're looking for perfectionism in some ways. We want to hope that, like I was saying last time, that we can do enough of something to alleviate us from the pain or discomfort of being human. And at the end of the day, humans are imperfect as creatures. Our humanity is what gives us the ability to choose to either do something that we perceive as good or something that we perceive as negative. And that choice is really ultimately where our power is. Whether it's the choice to engage in a behavior that I no longer want to engage in, whether it's the choice to use a substance that I don't want to use, or it's a choice to pay for the person's coffee for me behind me in Starbucks, if we're going to Starbucks these days still. I mean, if I'm still going to Starbucks these days, but like we always have the freedom of choice in our actions. And so just because I choose to observe a set of spiritual principles or follow a religious guideline, whatever that might be, it doesn't mean I don't still have the choice to do something outside of that. And it's not, I don't innately become a perfect person once I start to say that I'm a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or an atheist, whatever it is, or even a person in recovery. I think that was, I'll share personally for myself. I've been in recovery since I was 18. And coming into the rooms at such a young age, there was this naivety of like, I'm going to this place where people want to get help. And so we're all good people. And we're all going to just like want to take care of each other. I'm going into utopia when I walk into a 12-step room. And that's, unfortunately, that's not true. There's a saying that I hear a lot about Judaism, is that you can't judge Judaism by the Jews, right? But you can't judge 12-step fellowships by the people who go to 12-step meetings. And across the board, just because we perceive an organization that is either religious or spiritual in nature doesn't necessarily eliminate it from the realities of being a human, which is that we have the choice to harm each other at times. And if I'm choosing to do harmful things, that also doesn't eliminate me from truly being a spiritual person who's trying to better myself. And I think when I had experiences that were hurtful in the 12-step fellowships, it would have been easy to write off 12-step and say, oh, see, there's no point in me being in recovery. These people hurt me, but it wasn't 12-step that hurt me. It wasn't the basic text that hurt my feelings. It was a person. And same with religion. It's somebody using religion in a hurtful way or choosing to do something outside of the principles that I perceive are important that's hurtful to me, not the actual thing itself. And the easier I am on myself and the more accepting I am of my own imperfection, it's easier to be accepting of how imperfect the rest of us can be. Along with what Ellie was saying, I was thinking about the idea of if I take myself too seriously, no one else will, and so I can take religion too seriously, I can take recovery too seriously, I can take being a therapist too seriously, on, and then have a bit of self-righteousness that makes me not as ideal of a person in any of those areas as I would like to be, or as I say a lot, it doesn't allow me to be the person who my God intends me to be in those situations when I take myself more seriously than I need to. So there's a balance that we're always learning, and as long as we're learning, we're alive and we're human, and I'm grateful for that. So thanks.
RJ, you want to weigh in?
Not really.
Okay, so let me say the following. A little while back, I was counseling a family. Parents were secular Jews, and their son went off to Israel, came back fully religious, whatever that word means. We'll get back to that in a moment. And he was now, essentially, they saw that as creating a rift in the family, because he wouldn't eat from his mother's food, doesn't want to come for Passover, it wasn't kosher enough, they were not Shabbat observant, and so on. Since I knew not the boy, I knew the parents, because they had come to some of my classes, they were spiritual. and somewhat traditional, but not the standards of their son. So they came for advice. What do we do? Our loving son, he's gone off his mind from their perspective. So I sat with him. He was an intelligent guy. And I said to him, look, you have to remember that now that you're coming and become more observant, and your parents see you as more arrogant and judgmental, that's not really what religion is about. If they saw you as more sensitive and more loving and more giving and more understanding, they would respect your religion. What they're seeing is just an obstinate guy who just embraced some rituals, and they don't see anything. They don't recognize you as the loving boy that they brought up. And he was argued with me. He said, no, but these are the laws. I said, look, the laws are what you do. But if it doesn't come with that heart and soul. So he said, what should I do? I can't be there Pesach. I said, maybe you should sit down with your mother and say to her, you know what? Let's do Pesach together. I'm going to help you do it in a way like we've never done, the way our great-grandparents did it. Anyway, to his credit, long story short, he did do it this way. And it created a deeper relationship. The parents slowly have become more observant because of their son. I'm telling the story because I have to be very honest. I'm repulsed. I use the word very deliberately, repulsed, when I see someone who calls themselves religious, but they're immoral or unethical. Because to me, what does that mean? Listen, we're all flawed human beings. And as Ellie said, I'm not judging them. But why do you call yourself so over religious? Because you do one mitzvah, but you're missing the punchline? That let's say you're very Shabbos observant, or you dress a certain way. So whenever I speak to religious audiences, or at least what they call themselves religious, I always ask the question, I say, why are you frum? Why are you religious? Is it because you went on a search to find God and you found that this approach is the best way? Or is it a cultural thing? You grew up with it. How many of you even make an effort? So much part of the relationship with God is effort. If you do things by rote, mechanically, actually in the Bible, it says that God is insulted. It's like saying, I love you by rote. Love and relationship has to be with passion, with growth, with something dynamic. So in answering the question, Shana, that you posed about religious and immoral, maybe they're not religious. Who decided what religion is anyway? Doesn't, in the Judaism at least, the Torah determines what's religious. If a person, and I've asked this question to many, a person keeps one mitzvah, one good deed, then you know what that is? To love your fellow like yourself. They're passionate about it. They go overboard to be kind to other people and generous, but they're not strict in other laws, just a hypothetical. And someone else who's keeping the other laws, but does not keep that fundamental law of loving another, who decided this one's more religious than that one? In general, it's not in our hands. We're not the judges. It's only God that makes these decisions. My point is there are many distortions of who decided what is religion, what is not. Rabbi Akiva, the greatest Talmudic sage, said, all of Judaism is the cardinal principle is loving another, like I mentioned before from the Tanya. So I think it goes back to the distortions. A religion that allows that a person who sees themselves as religious, but they can be immoral, they have to say to themselves, if you are stealing from other people and you're unethical, then it is just as bad as not keeping Shabbos, maybe worse. And a person has to acknowledge that. Unfortunately, people get trapped in their own definitions. And the other way around with spirituality without religion, this is not a judgment call. I would just say, I think it was mentioned by Faith and throughout this conversation, it grounds it, spirituality. I know spiritual people that are very abusive with their spirituality. They're abusive sexually. They take advantage of others for their own so-called, in the name of their spiritual superiority. They can be spiritually arrogant. That exists. That's why I would just introduce that there's being materialistic, there's being spiritual, and then there's being holy, godly. And the key word with that is humility. Humility. In Hebrew, there's a word called bittul. It's not about you. It's about serving something greater than you. Spirituality, that's about you. It's just as bad as materialism that's about you. It's just another form of ego. It's a spiritual ego instead of a materialistic ego. And ultimately, the goal is to reach a whole entire level, which is there's something greater than you are. And you stand in modest and humble before that higher presence in every act you do, in every interaction you have with other people. And that humility brings love, understanding, sensitivity, no judgmentalism at all, and a type of embrace that every human being was created in the divine image. And if you love God, it means you have to love that which God loves, which is his children, every human being on earth. That's the full definition. Then it earns the right that you can call yourself religious. When you're able to embrace such a, now, are we perfect? No, none of us are perfect. Not I know. But that's the standard. If that's not even your standard, then you can't label yourself as some type of religious authority or religious figure. That there's a standard, and that's the standard in my view.
Thank you, everyone, for that. That was so in depth, and just really it hit home a little bit. I think a big part of what I'm understanding is that we're judgmental as human beings. We are judgmental, and we're so busy judging ourselves in a negative way, and that we're so sure that other people are judging us the same way we're judging us. And if we would just get rid of all that judgment, like who's to decide who or what or when? If we take out all that judgment, the world is just a more beautiful place, and people are just people trying to do the best they can. So I absolutely love what you brought in there. I just want to stop for 1 minute and introduce Ken Seeley. Ken, thank you for joining. I'm so excited to have you here. Do you want to take a few minutes and just say hi and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, no, thank you everyone for being here. I love the topic, and I'm glad I got to hear what the rabbi just said. And you know, it brought me back to thinking. You know, you say that people are out there saying in the name of God, you know, my religion, like you said, that person that came back and, you know, was telling his parents, I can't eat your food, you know, and having that kind of rigidness is where, if we go back in history, there's been more bloodshed over that kind of rigidness than there is love. So is it really the religion, or is it really what we're all taught to be? Because humans, animals, everything, when we're coming from a place of love, it doesn't matter how you get there. You know, it doesn't matter how you come to that place, like you said, of being humble, you know, and loving all for who they are. And I know this is a delicate situation right now, being that we're in the eve of election night, you know, but it's the same thing. You know, who are we to judge? You know, whoever people vote for, they have their beliefs. They have their beliefs in religion. They have their beliefs in politics. And the reality is when you're spiritual, when you're religious, is when you could be in that place of accepting everyone where they're at instead of fighting. And I one of the big things I see in the program and around recovery, they're those big book thumpers. They're the same thing. In the big book, it says it right here, you know, and they're yelling at you as they're telling you with full anger. It's like, oh my God, calm down. I just want to go with the flow and go with what the program has taught me, is to love thy neighbor as wanting to be loved myself. And it's just as simple with, you know, religion. And if we could all accept each other for who we are. And, you know, I love all religions, because everybody that's putting their faith into their religion, I know, is getting closer to their God of their understanding. And I just love that, you know, that's a goal for people, that's the most important in their life for them. And if we all could come from that place, I really believe we'd have a better place on earth. Because, you know, like we said, remember back in the day, you know, in the Roman times, right? what were they doing? They were fighting it over the name of God and killing each other and, you know, just torturing each other, you know, over that, when in all reality, just let people live and be who they are. And that's what we do at our facility is, you know, we want you to find what works for you. And I'm not going to throw the big book down your throat. I'm not going to throw a religion down your throat. I want you to find something that you connect with in the universe that you feel like, I belong here. I belong here. And that's why I really love religions, because it gives a place for people to feel like they belong and they're not out there by themselves in this world. So that's, you know, that's what we offer down here in Palm Springs at our treatment centers. You know, I love it. You know, when we first started opening our sober living down here, God, 10 years ago, and we opened up our first sober living, and it was right across the street from a temple, and the rabbi would come and he would speak on our behalf and saying, these are good neighbors. These are people that are trying to do good in their lives. And, you know, didn't even know us from anywhere, and just stood up and came to our rescue to help fight the city to say, we don't want those people in our neighborhood, you know, and they were directly across the street from us and saying, no, these people are cleaning up our neighborhood. They're helping our neighborhood. And to have the rabbi come and do that just warmed me at my heart to say that that's what religion is. That's what spirituality is. It's not what people take it like. I keep using that big book thumper mentality. You know, if you take something and you're stern on it and you're fighting it and it's the only right way for not only you, but for everyone else, then that I don't think is faith and believing in the way things are supposed to be. And that's where I hope people could get to, where we bring them to a place of knowing that they're perfect the way they are and they belong where they're at. I think that's the key. If we could give that gift to people, then we've done our job. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. How well said. I know you plan to just come on for a little bit, but I'm hoping you'll stay on because I love your perspective. As always, you always just, you're good with your words and you have a lot of insight into this. So thank you for that. I'm gonna throw out one more question to jump off of what was said. Rabbi Jacobson, you mentioned that religion without spirituality is like a corpse. The question is, what about spirituality without religion? How do we deal with the conflict of belief in God without the context of religion? And I think that's something that isn't addressed often enough. And I'd love it if some of you can jump in and give me your opinion on that.
So I'll begin now, if I may, since you mentioned my name. But I would really love to hear everybody's take on this, obviously. I think continuing that analogy, there's a thing called becoming a floater. You know, when you're spiritual, you can easily float away, either in an ascetic lifestyle where you detach, you know, everything is bliss. And not always is it grounded in a structural way. You know, think of it like someone playing music by ear and not following musical notes. So yes, you can play beautiful music, but there's something about, and I like to put it this way, that the structure of music, which is structure, allows you to transcend structure. It's not meant to limit you or stifle you. So if we're able to see religion in its true light as essentially the buttons you press that allow you to soar, then you have also that grounding element. Because at the end of the day, as spiritual as we may be, we still need to eat and drink and sleep and interact with others. So how is that going to work? I know people who are very spiritual, but they just don't have their act together on a very basic level. Maimonides puts it beautifully. He says, when you really want to see who's a intelligent person, it's not just how smart they are and how spiritual they are, but also how they walk, and how they talk, and how they interact in the details, the small details. So ultimately, spirituality needs to permeate and infuse the material world with a higher state of awareness. Not just that you live in a higher state of consciousness, but that consciousness also affects and informs your daily activities, how you eat and how you drink. So in that context, and that's where it made total sense to me, if you're going to eat with discretion, which can also be called eating kosher, you're thinking about the food, you're thinking about the spiritual energy and the spiritual sparks within the food, but you also eat like a mensch. You eat with a certain etiquette. You eat with a certain sensitivity, with a modesty. And the same thing is how we run our businesses. You know, a lot of people like to compartmentalize. At work, they're like sharks, tough. You don't see their heart. When they come home, they're very sensitive. But the true spirituality should not be compartmentalized. It should be integrated into our daily lives. And that's ultimately where I'll be honest, I don't like the word religion. We're using it because religion to me always rubbed me the wrong way. It sounded like, okay, you're a human being and here's a religious human being, as if religion is not human. But since we're defining the word, when I say religious, I mean a ritual, a tradition that is saturated and infused with higher consciousness and spirituality. And then you have the fusion of body and soul. So spirituality would be like sharing ideas, but never putting them down into words that others can read. It's very lofty, very ethereal, but it doesn't have the grounding element. And we need both in life. We need to be able to reach the greatest heights, but also have your head in the clouds, but your feet firmly planted on the ground.
I'm gonna jump in, but I do want to hear from everybody also. I keep being mindful of you, RJ, that you have time to share also. So I'll keep it short. You too, Ellie. But I keep thinking about this during our whole discussion is what I'm noticing is like I have a level of apprehension that what I admire about Rabbi Jacobson is that he's able to speak assertively and clearly without tiptoeing around this subject. And I think for me as a therapist and the way that I'm educated to talk about religion and spirituality is to be very mindful to kind of tiptoe and not offend and not impose and not be or project onto anybody what my beliefs should be for them and let them find their own path. And as I'm listening to the difference in the way each of the panelists are speaking, I'm just keep reflecting like, why is it that sometimes I might tiptoe or not speak as strongly? And as I was reading the comments and I'm reading the questions, like, oh, because this is such a polarizing topic, right? And so as a therapist, my goal is to not make a client feel ostracized in any way and not feel like, in the space of the therapeutic session that they're safe. And this is a topic that brings up so much pain and hurt and can so easily be polarizing that we're trained to not project our own religious values onto our clients, which I think is imperative and is crucial to being a therapist. But as a person who identifies as a spiritual person and who subscribes to certain religious ritual, I have such a different belief. So I've been sitting here listening to everybody and balancing these two things. And as we talk about being spiritual without being religious, I was extremely, extremely spiritual, but not without ritual. And there's no practice of spirituality that I found that didn't have a set of rituals or a guideline that I followed in order to pursue that spiritual path. And I think as we start to talk about religion and maybe the people who are joining us or even me as a panelist coming into this discussion, I think about religion, I think about Judaism, Christianity, Muslim, atheist, agnostic. I think about these like very defined religions without thinking about what is really it mean to be religious. And within my experience of spirituality, even whenever I was seeking something that was just felt purely spiritual, I was doing it within a structure and within a framework. And I think that there's always the need for guidance, even if we're spiritual. we started to touch on this a little bit, but from what I noticed is that in spirituality, without any guidelines, if I didn't have a mentor or I didn't have somebody that was teaching me or guiding me along a spiritual path, it's really easy to get into ego, and then I'm no longer actually being spiritual. So if there isn't a guideline or a path or a set of ritual that I'm observing as a spiritual person, then self-will run riot can be a really, really harmful thing for myself and for others and for my recovery. So even if I may not be in a place where I'm identifying with a specific religion, I'm still practicing God's will rather than self-will. And I think that in itself can be a guideline to be spiritual. And like Rabbi was talking about, even in spirituality, there needs to be groundedness, or else that dark side can take over.
RJ, would you like to jump in, or would you like me to?
Go ahead, brother.
So in terms of this, I'm much more in the question than I am in the answer. I find certain aspect that I've been expressing certain aspects of Judaism more recently, but I don't know that that's an expression of spirituality as much as it is wanting some grounding more for my family or something like that. I don't know that it's coming from an attempt to be closer to, I don't know if it's coming from the same place as spirituality, but what I do know is that recovery, my greatest lessons in recovery have been, like all of us, but some of the really, really negative ones and the really negative experience I've had there, and especially being able to see how religion can get distorted and not allow that to affect my perception or any longer affect my perception of the religion itself. So I'll explain that more in the story itself. In recovery, when I came in, I like to say that my view was God didn't exist, and if he did, I hated him. Over time, though, I got to the reading of the second step, and I realized that, this is going to challenge that belief, and I have to look at this. What is my belief of God? And today I look at it as everyone has a belief of God, and that's worthy of exploration. Meaning we're playing this game, quote unquote, that has certain rules, and maybe the rules is there's no one watching and there are no rules, but that's a certain belief. And we're forced to explain it in some way. I don't look at God of our understanding in the 12 steps as a passive instruction. Whatever we understand I see it as an active instruction that the God has to be one of our understanding. So we got to work towards understanding whatever this God is. In any event, I was introduced to an individual in recovery who I was told can really help me overcome my resentments, much stronger than resentments, my rage towards organized religion. I got to know this guy. I was extremely impressed by him, and he became a mentor of mine. By mentor, I don't just mean sponsor. He was much more. I looked up to this guy tremendously. I guess I forgot that he had the same credentials I did that allowed him to get into the rooms. I looked up to this guy for everything. I asked him about a lot of stuff, and especially in terms of spirituality. He happened not to be Jewish, but he told me that he said, for your own healing, I would imagine it would be reconnecting with your own faith. Mine came through reconnecting through mine, and through yours will come through reconnecting through yours. After talking to him almost every day for about a year, I found out that he was misusing the role and influence he had as somewhat of a guru in recovery. And he was taking advantage of other members of recovery in horrible ways. I confronted him on it. He was dishonest with me. And the foundation of my recovery was completely shattered. A short time afterwards, something I shared in a meeting got back to someone else, which broke the anonymity of meetings. And now I just said, I'm done. I'm done with this whole thing, right? It's a waste of time. The guru is crazy. He's a hypocrite. People don't keep the rules. Things are getting back to me, and I left. I relapsed. I didn't relapse immediately. I had a plan of how I was going to stay sober anyway, but over time I relapsed. This lasted for about 6 months. I wasn't in a good place. I ran into a friend of mine, and he said, "I'm dragging your ass to a meeting." And I didn't have the fight in me to say no, so I went, and slowly I began coming back to meetings. That experience, and I invite anyone who's had a particularly horrible experience with religion, forced me to really examine where my security and trust was coming from. And what someone pointed out to me was that if this person was able to shake me that much, then my foundation was not in a higher power. My foundation was him, obviously. Otherwise, it wouldn't shatter it. And he invited me to develop a relationship, a direct connection with a higher power. And this is where I think religion sometimes trips itself up, is that it gets into a hierarchy or explains things in terms of a hierarchy. No offense to the person with the rabbi on the panel, but he's no closer to God than anyone else is, right? We're all spiritual. And I don't, obviously he doesn't believe this to be the case if he's on this panel, but oftentimes that's the view in religion, that one person is closer to God than the other. And when I heard the story of Abraham shattering the idols of his father, I don't think that Abraham shattered the idols of his father and then said, I got the right God for you, and then handed it on to his son. I think it was an instruction to his son, shatter my idols, because if his connection is coming through his father, then it's coming through another human being. And since then, I've worked hard to develop a direct connection. The terrible experience that I had in recovery with this individual, this mentor of mine, became a way to let go of some of my resentments towards religion, recognizing that I was also misplacing or confusing God with individuals the same way I confused recovery with individuals or spirituality with individuals. And I invite anyone who has the same negative experience, which I think a lot of people have had negative experience with spiritual gurus or religious gurus, to go direct to the source. He's more reliable.
If I may, can I weigh in about one thing, Ellie, you said? I think if I may.
In debates, they say if you say the guy's name, then he's allowed to get 30 seconds. You get 30 seconds.
I just wanted to say one thing which I think may be helpful. I think some people are more wired to be spiritual and others less. There are people who are also more wired to be, I don't want to say the word conformist, but they like structure. You know, like the people who are the reliable, like clockwork, they need structure. And then there are those that are just flighty. I can just speak for myself. I am a bohemian by nature. If I did not ground myself with commitments, I would be dangerous, frankly. I think I would hurt myself, I would hurt others. So for me, it was a very deliberate decision, not in a way that I don't love the structure and family and so on, but it was necessary for me, because without it, I could have easily just justified anything. Because when you get into that spiritual place, there's a very thin line between spirituality, sensuality, and sexuality. And you can explain anything, and you have everything is connected, and we're all one, and the boundaries disappear. I mean, look what happened, just as an example, the Psychedelics Revolution in the 60s. LSD was first a wonder drug. You know, it brought people to higher states of consciousness, but then when it was misused, it became a source of tremendous abuse and destruction. So in Hasidic thought, in the mystical teachings, it talks about a concept of soaring upward and not being grounded below. And there's actually a story in the Bible that talks about the two sons of Aaron who got so consumed by their passion and ecstasy to connect with the divine, with the transcendent, that they literally burned out. It actually calls it foreign fire, consumed them. So there's also, I was always very fascinated by the Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, geniuses. They've soared and soared. They had no way to ground it. And at some point, it just burned out as a result, each of them in their own particular way. So spirituality could be actually quite dangerous if you don't have that grounding. So there I see, I don't want to say religion, but structure, commitment, which of course includes religious commitment and so on. Just wanted to throw that into the equation.
Go ahead.
So yeah, no, I love what I'm hearing here, because it's bringing me back to, oh my God, I got to get back to my structure. It's like, it's so funny because for 10 years, like I talked to all of you about, and with 10 years of sobriety, I bought a gun and, wanted to commit suicide. because I didn't want to do drugs and alcohol, but I was in a full-blown sex and love addiction. And again, that, you know, as you're talking about that spirituality, I'm very spiritual, but there was no structure. You know, I had 10 years of working a program, but there was no structure in my spirituality. And I met with someone and he said, you're missing what they teach in the big book through prayer and meditation. You're not meditating. And so he taught me how to meditate. And so it started off with 10 minutes a day to, you know, 20 minutes a day to a half hour, all the way up to an hour and 15 minutes every day. So if I had to be at an 8 o'clock appointment, I was going to take me an hour to get ready and get there. So I figured 7. So I got to get up at 5:45 to meditate for that hour and 15 minutes. And I did that every single day for over 10 years. And while I did that, the answers to my company and my business and my personal life, all of those things naturally came to me. It wasn't painful. It wasn't like swimming upstream. It just naturally came to me, and my business exploded. I got in a relationship that I've been in with for 16 years now. So all of these positive things came to me, and it was through that ritual of every day getting up and lighting my incense and praying and meditating and taking that hour and 15 minutes to just sit with a mantra and clear my brain. And when I did that ritual, everything went smoothly. And I did it every day for 10 years. And then, then it drops down to every other day. The ritual is not as important. And things feel like I'm swimming upstream. Now life is getting rough again. And it's all making sense through this session here, is that, it's that easy. It's that basic. It's that basic. I need the ritual and I need the spirituality. I need to have a belief that there's someone else in control, because I'm always saying, oh, God doesn't want me doing this. God doesn't want me. There's another sign from God. I shouldn't be doing this, because I don't take credit or control for anything I do. I'm always trying to listen, but I'm not taking the time to listen with my ritual that I've done. And that's why things are in chaos right now, where I'm not as grounded, because it's that simple. Yes, I have the spirituality and the faith, but I'm not following the ritual that got me there. So I think this talk has been really powerful to show the power of, the strong. I love the way the rabbi put it, is the people that are really firm, they need the structure. And then the hippies, you would call them, back in the 70s, and the hippies that fly by night, and are all over and do whatever, but in all reality, we all need both. We all need both. And without both, I'm not going to get to that higher level of consciousness. I'm not going to get, as Eli said, closer to God. I'm getting with that saying in the program, when you're not close to God, who moved? It wasn't God, it was me, and that saying in the program. And it's so simple. And people that get addicted to sex or drugs or other things, what I'm seeing in my practice is, and again, I'm like Faith is, I can't say, oh, you have to follow this way. I can't give them when I'm working with my clients at my treatment center and say, follow this and this will work. I got to open the door to give them an awareness, to give them options to work. But if they're not following a ritual that's not only 12 steps, I think the 12 steps are great. And again, I'm telling you, I worked those steps hard for the first 10 years, but still had a gun ready to commit suicide. It was when I was missing my religion and my spirituality. So I think the key is really learning how to combine them and helping people see that the best way is to balance both. Have the structure and the spirituality, have a balance there. I think if I could teach my clients to have a balance in those two, then I did my job, on however they get there. I think that's really the key, giving them the opportunity to do it, but showing them that you need both. You can't just be a hippie, you can't just go flying by night, taking acid all day, because that doesn't work. I tried that one. So that one didn't work. But the reality is that the structure is the religion. It clicked for me today. So thank you so much, Rabbi, for making that connection. Okay, RJ, your turn.
Thank you, my brother and sisters. I'm going to read, I think, one of the most powerful segments of the book of Lois Remembers, and it was an autobiography, so she wrote it. So these are her words. So she was there when Bill kept promising and writing in the Bible that, I'm going to stop drinking and all this kind of good stuff, and I promise you I'll never drink again. And Bill wasn't the best of saints. He was a womanizer. He took LSD for 5 years. It was prescribed to him. His wife knew that he was a womanizer. If you Google his will, it has 10% that's going to his mistress. And I almost quit Alcoholics Anonymous, Eli, because I heard that he was a philanderer and he was this and he was that. And it was like going into hell and acting like nobody sins. Walking on this earth, everybody sins. Everybody sins. But what do we do with it? Right? And I think that's universal truth. There's nobody that's perfect on this earth. And I love that Lois Wilson says this. She says, so what is love? What is it that passes between two people that love each other? Science has discovered that the emotions of fear and anger actually produce emanations in the human body that can be sensed by another human, a man or women or children or animals, and perhaps even plants. But I have never heard that science has studied the great force of love. I suspect that love, too, is an actual physical emanation as well as a spiritual force, telepathy of the heart, and not just the absence of hurtful emotions. I deeply believe that it is love that makes the world go around. God is love, and love is the creative force, the force that ties families and friends together. It inspires us to greater endeavor in all fields of activity. In love of God, in love of man, in love of ideas, and in love of self, and in love of things. The well of love refills itself. The more one gives of love, the more one has to give. Children who are not loved grow up unhappy and rebellious. And even though they may be treated with kindness, that is not enough. They need the positive warmth and security of love. They may even need it physically as well as emotionally and spiritually. Now, this force, embodied as it is in God's love, kept Bill and me together, and finally, through various channels of processes, sobered him up. There are moments even now when the wonder and the beauty of Bill's regeneration still fills me with awe. Now, I used to believe that thinking was the highest function of human beings. The Alcoholics Anonymous experience changed me. I now realize that loving is our supreme function. The heart precedes the mind. And I don't know if you've ever been hit in the face in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I've had that experience. There's a presidential candidate that started his candidacy of saying how Mexicans are rapists and murderers, and some of them are good. What would you act like, Rabbi, or Eli, or Faith, or Shauna, or Ken, if they attacked you? What is love? Right? So in my heart, I know the man is sick, and there's people who believe that he's not sick. I believe that. Has nothing to do with spirituality, has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with somebody's mindset. And that mindset was demeaning to not only my culture, but I didn't cross the river. Mexico was here, it became Texas, and it became the United States of America. There was no river crossing in my family. And so I had to learn, not only in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but in society at large, that I have to practice this spirituality. So I try to meet clients where they're at. I don't try to make up some kind of theory. I say, okay, you don't believe? All right, I've got some books for you. Here's a book for you, the little book. This is a book for atheists that don't believe in God. Not only that, but there's a daily reflections also that they can read, that they don't have to believe in God, right? How about if they're Buddhist? I got a book, 12 Step for Buddhist. How about if they're Jewish? We've been talking about the Jewish faith. This is not the only one on the 12 steps. There's plenty by the Jewish faith and Jewish writers and rabbis. Here's one by a clinician who just passed away, Joseph Nowotny. Okay. And then here's one for sex addiction, the guide and path, right, of the 12 steps. And then, okay, he's Native American. Okay, I got one for the Native American. Okay, so I try to meet them where they're at. And if they don't know where they're at, I recommend this book, The 12 Wisdom Steps, and I put it in the chat, right? And it has all the major wisdoms. So it's up to them. And that's what spirituality means to me, is meeting them where they're at and then sharing them honestly about my own conflict and my own decision-making skills, and that I don't have perfection, but I have spirituality of imperfection, right? Even Brene Brown is touring the country via, Zoom, talking about the spirituality of imperfection. There's so many things out there that can teach us that, politics, yawn. Okay, just letting you know how I dealt with my own spirituality. I dealt with my own spirituality by training my mind to know that I will be offended. And when I speak my mind, I will be offended. And so it's really difficult for me at times to hear people say damning things about a particular culture. It doesn't matter if it's Mexican American or Jewish or Puerto Rican or whatever. That harms me. And for me to be silent for that is wrong. Then I'm being complicit. For me to be silent when there's somebody dying on the side of the road of alcoholism, I can't save everybody, but I can at least do something. And so that's where I'm at. I held my gas for the end because it's kind of stinky. But the reality of it is that I'm not perfect, and I'm so grateful that I got to be with you guys today to learn about your journey, which will make me better, be a better therapist, a better human being, and recognize that Lois Wilson went through so much with Bill Wilson, and how she is the backbone of the recovery aspects of what we have today. Here we are able to speak in 2020 on Zoom and be able to deal with these conversations that we're having. So thank you.
Thank you, RJ. Thank you, everyone, for your insight in that. Ellie, when you were talking earlier, it reminded me of something that you said to me maybe like 4 or 6 months ago, where I said, Ellie, I want my recovery to be as strong as your recovery is. And your response to me, I don't know if you remember, you said, I want my recovery to be as strong as you think mine is. So I love the way, everyone brought it together, where it's all internal. It's all what we see and how we view ourselves. And I think that's a big part of where we're all trying to go with this, is as much as we're expecting people to do certain things, that's not what it is. It's all about how we choose to view it. And I'm going to bring up a topic that I know is a little bit controversial, but I want to just throw it out there. And that's about toxic religion and healthy religion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I know this topic is a big one. It comes up often. It's one that I'm curious about because I never really know where the line is. Like, just because I define it as toxic, does that mean that's really what it is? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that if you want to jump in.
I'll hop in on this just because there are some questions in the Q&A that have had my mind stirring. So even though I'm listening to everybody, I keep coming back to a topic that we haven't really gotten to or we haven't addressed. And obviously 2 hours to cover religion and spirituality is not enough time because it's a lifelong journey. So we're not going to cover everything, but I was thinking about, you know, the flip side where people define religion or use religion in the name of abuse, and use religion as a way to justify or rationalize over abusive behaviors that then becomes, you know, the term that we would use as a clinician, or that I would use as a clinician, or we use in the community is religious trauma. And then also individuals that are suffering from religious addiction and then are harming the people around them because they're addicted to the religion and using it as to justify behaviors that are self-seeking and self-serving. And so both of those things, I think when we come in, for me, when I come into this conversation about religion and spirituality, I don't immediately think about the complex trauma of religion, even though that's what I specialize in my practice, because I'm coming from this lens of like talking about the positive sides of religion and spirituality and how do we use that in recovery and how do we overcome some of the past stuff. But the reality is that the damaging effects of toxic religiosity, I mean, result in catastrophic things in clients' life that I see. And sometimes people who don't make it to my office because either they end up dead from an addiction or from suicide before that. And we hear, I mean, for me personally, I hear about that a lot in the community of people who've gone through severe religious trauma, either because they are rejected from their communities for not being as observant, or are looked down upon because they're not the same way as what their families were and that type of stuff. And if I like had the time, I would do a whole webinar. Maybe Shauna, now I'm shooting myself in the foot right now because now Shauna's gonna
Yes, I'm gonna do it.
But if I had a whole webinar just talk about complex trauma, because what happens is that the messages that I'm told, I misperceive love as doing something that I was told is loving that is actually toxic and harmful and abusive, and I get stuck in these very difficult cycles of behaviors. And I think earlier when we were talking about religion without spirituality, for some, and I can't diagnose over a webinar, but for some people who may think that they're practicing religion, they're actually just re-traumatizing themselves or others from the trauma that they received from toxic practices or religion in the name of abuse or addiction. So I think there's a whole other side of this conversation that we're about to get into, or that this brings up for me, because I wouldn't call it toxic religion. I would call it religious trauma or religious addiction.
I'll take off where Faith left off. I'll say the following. I totally agree with you, and I would add even furthermore. I think toxic behavior or toxic individuals, whether it's in the shape of religion or in the shape of sex addiction or gambling or other forms of abuse, it's just different names for the same toxins. Just takes on different shapes. Unfortunately, I find that people who are toxic and so-called dressed up in the garments of religion sometimes are far more dysfunctional than people without the religion, because religion so-called also makes it holy. You sanctify your toxins, basically. You think it's justified. And it may not even be deliberate. It's because that's what you grew up with. So I think the most important thing, perhaps, is to really define it for ourselves and for those listening. What defines toxic altogether? Let's not talk about religion for a moment. What's toxic? What's healthy? So contrasts are always very valuable to appreciate something. So I'll just paint the picture of, which may not be realistic in our world, but hypothetically and the standard. Think of a child born to the healthiest possible parents. 9 months in the womb of the mother, protected, nurtured. When the child is born, the parents do everything possible to validate, to love, to further nurture, to support that child unconditionally. No critique, no judgment, never imposing, the parents never imposing their standards on the child. Even when the child falls or makes a mistake, it's always approached with love. Let's grow together, a selflessness. Now, I know I'm painting a picture which very few people perhaps grew up in such an environment. Why is this healthy? Because the ego is not a driving factor. Biases and prejudices and attitudes are not in control. The anger of a parent is not in play. So a child, like a flower, is nurtured and allowed to grow, so it grows into a confident adult. There's no duplicity, there's seamlessness, there's a certain innocence. I know the perfect example that I'm giving here is perhaps an archetype, but take, by contrast, toxins, just like physical toxins. You look at a newborn child, you see they breathe. They use their entire lungs. You could see it heaving up and down. But slowly they start breathing in the pollutants of this world. And by the time you're around age 13, 14, you're already only using 80% of your lungs or 90%. That's why we cough when we try to take a full breath. The same thing psychologically. If parents, their own dysfunctionality, and from one extreme to the next, I'm not even talking about overt physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse. Let's just talk, judgmental, criticism, always hearing negative, a child not getting the love, the unconditional love. These are toxins that impede the growth of the child. And these toxins are essentially damaging and destructive. And they're often generational. Now, in some cases, they take on form of religious shape. I know people who call themselves religious. They're the most toxic people I've ever met. Trust me, religion doesn't have a monopoly on toxins. There's plenty of toxins out there. But let's call a spade a spade. Something toxic is toxic. If it's not nurturing, if it's not loving, if it's about you and you're projecting yourself on another, and there's a narcissistic element, a selfish element, immediately you know it's toxic. No matter what shape it takes, no matter how devout or pious that person may be. And again, unfortunately, religion packages it in a way you think this is a religious person. I can't believe it. A religious person behaved that way, but you know what? A toxic person is a toxic person. Now, I don't even like to use the word toxic person. There's no person that's toxic, but toxins have now controlled your life. Because we also believe, and here's the good side of the story, we also believe that the child always remains pure, the soul is always pure, there's a goodness that is retained even if we grow up in a toxic environment. And the same thing is with religion. I meet people who grew up in very toxic religious homes, and they had to leave it all before they had to lose it before they find it. Because it's like getting rid of the good cells with the bad cells. But the good news is that you can revisit and re-embrace, as Ellie said about his own life and what he went through, as also in recovery. Recovery, you have toxic people in recovery, toxic gurus. That's what it is. So I think that it's vital to spell it out as much as possible, because you need to identify this. And I say this to all of us. It's sometimes very difficult to discern what's toxic behavior. There are things that we all understand, but there's more subtle forms of it that can masquerade as if it's all nice and good. And that's far more dangerous than overt toxic. Overt, this person's a destructive person, just get out of the way. It's also damaging, especially for children. But the more subtle ones, and that I believe faith suggested, requires a lot more discussion, because you must identify it and make sure it does not continue to cause bleeding, meaning to get out of the line of fire. And it could be from parents, it could be from siblings, it could be from clergy, it can be from anywhere. Toxins are everywhere around us. But remember, I'm not trying to paint an evil world. Beneath it all lies beautiful, beautiful potential. So I want to make sure I conclude with that hopeful message. There's beautiful potential, but you need to clean out the dust, be able to access it.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm going to piggyback off of where you ended. As I don't have any titles in front of my name or letters behind my name, I usually talk in stories. So those are freeing because you can say things and you have the benefit of the title, but it's also limiting, as we've heard from Faith and Ken, that times you have to dance around subjects. So I can dance less. A number of years ago, I was speaking a lot about my story of being sexually abused as a child and healing from it. And I was particularly focused on the Orthodox Jewish community, hoping that I can bring some awareness to the challenge there. Some say it also happens there. Some say it happens there more. I don't know which one it is, but I know that it does happen there and it was brushed under the rug for a long time. So I felt motivated to talk about it. And I went on somewhat of a self-imposed speaking tour of United States, Canada, and I spoke in, I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10 different cities about my story. In one of these cities, someone who was there or heard a recording afterwards tracked me down. And after a couple of attempts, he got my number, we spoke on the phone, and I saw he was in a really, really difficult spot. It was very clear at the beginning of the call, and he was asking me how I was comfortable talking about these things. And he was focused more on asking me questions, but I had to understand what was going on with him. So I said, let me know what's going on. Like, what's your story? What's bothering you? So he mentioned a little bit about abuse, but I said, present day, what's kicking your ass? So he said, I'm doing things that are not at all compatible with who I am as a person. I'm a religious Jew and I'm stuck. I think he was in his late 30s, early 40s, and I don't know where I'm going. I said, listen, I've heard it all. If you can't be specific with me, then I'm not sure he can be specific. Either I've done it or I've heard it. So let me know what's going on. So eventually through the course of the conversation, he let me know that he's has strong homosexual attraction tendencies. He's not sure if he's straight. He's not sure if he's gay, and he's an Orthodox Jew, and he does not know how these two are compatible. I said, listen, I don't know anything about religion. I don't know anything about Judaism. I don't know anything about what God says about homosexuality. I just want to know. I have one simple question for you. Is it too much? Whoever you're having sex with, is it too much? He said, yes. I said, if it's too much, I know a place. And I recommended he go to 12 steps for recovery. Fast forward a few years, I lost contact with him. Fast forward a few years, he reconnected with me and we're talking about, and again, this conversation came up about his homosexuality. And although he's sober now, he has no idea where this goes because he still considers himself Orthodox. He still considers himself religious. At the time, he's not having sex regardless because he's in recovery, but eventually he wants to start a family and he feels trapped by this. So, and the problem is that he sees himself as an Orthodox Jew. So what I told him is that, I didn't use the word toxic, Shana, but basically that idea that whatever your belief about God is like, it's all wrong and you have to throw it out. So he said, how can you say it's all wrong? Like it says clearly it's an abomination and this and that. I said, okay, it says that there, but King David says in the Psalms, taste and you will see that God is good, right? I said, and right now, whatever you have is not good. It's a disaster. It's a total train wreck. It's not feeling right. It's not feeling good. I don't understand anything about the laws. I can't understand it. I'm pretty sure he used the same word for eating shrimp as he did use for gay sex, but I can't answer that. I don't know. I'm sure you have much more discomfort around one than the other. Those are personal things. But what I do know for sure is that it says clearly in Judaism, King David says it, taste and you will see that God is good. And right now you're not experiencing that. I said, I also know that through recovery, I've developed a relationship with a higher power. And some say this law is more important than other laws. And I've developed one that I don't have conflicts with my Judaism. I don't feel like I'm a bad Jew, even though I don't keep everything. I find myself being able to, and I should say, I told him, listen, I've dealt with this specific struggle myself. It's not part of I had that same challenge. He said, did you ever resolve whether you're straight or gay? I said, no, I didn't. I said, maybe there's an identity straight, maybe there's identity gay, and maybe there's identity me, right? Why do I have to fit into any one of these boxes that exists out there? And hopefully you resolve it for yourself. But what I do know is that you have this painting of God and you're trying to preserve part of it, thinking some of it is good. I said, if someone told me they have a picture of an elephant and 20% is right, I wouldn't try to figure out which 20% is right. I'd rip up the whole picture and start figuring out what an elephant is, because trying to piece it together from the 20% is much harder than starting again. Rip it down to the ground and start over. So being that you're in recovery, it's not going to make a practical difference to who he's going to sleep with that night. It's not going to make a difference in his case, but I have no question whatsoever, and I'm not a rabbi, so I can say it comfortably, that his definition of God is toxic to its core. And he has to rip it apart, and he has to start drawing the elephant again. And to me, that's the definition of toxic religion, when it interferes with one's ability to develop a pure relationship with a higher power. And where I ended with this, I said, listen, I grew up in Judaism, steeped in the heart of Crown Heights, right next to one of the holiest rabbis in the world. He's considered the leader of the Jewish world in a lot of ways. And I grew up a stone's throw away from his house. And I left that community miserable and not tasting this promise of King David, not at all. Then I went to recovery, and I found a God that was meaningful, that I could connect to, that I can trust in, that I'm not, the foundation of it is not thrown off by things people do. And oftentimes I'm faced with a contradiction, maybe, between the I said right now I don't have a contradiction. I said, but if I did have a contradiction between the God of recovery and the God of Judaism, from my own experience, I'd have to pick the God of recovery, because that's the God that I learned about there has been one that's given me something of meaning and something of value. For today, it's not contradicting anything in my life, despite the fact that some people may feel it does. For me, it doesn't. And I hope you can find the same thing with the promise of King David. You'll know it. You'll know when you find him that it's good, and you can trust him. He's a good Jew. he speaks well for the cause. And he had his own challenges, as we know, but we don't want to get into that. Rabbi Jacobson is going to be getting into that on Thursday night, but I don't want to mix up the conversation. So I'll end with that. I'll end with that on that note, that I told him, because that's all I can say, is this person came to me for something. I have no credentials. And I told him that his personal definition of God was toxic, and he can comfortably dispose of it.
Ellie, the only sacrilegious thing I found in your words was that you compared God to an elephant. That's it.
I compared God to a painting.
I'm just kidding. It was just a little humor here.
Thank you. I will send you the text so you can say it yourself. We'll do well. But thank you.
Yeah. Well said. Beautiful.
We were coming close to the end of the webinar. There are so many questions that we didn't get a chance to get to yet. So hopefully we'll be able to get to that another time. But thank you everyone for everything that you've said and everything that you've joined in about. Ellie, just to what you last said, I have to bring this up. I know I said it last webinar, but one of the things when I first met Rabbi Jacobson, he said to me, the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. And just with what you said, I feel like that's so in line, because that's really what it is. It's the God inside of us. It's what we find, and it's not a specific thing. So I love where you brought that in. If everyone wants to say a little closing remark, we'll just feel free to jump in, and then we could end off.
Shanna, by the way, by popular demand, you could always do a part 2, religion versus spirituality, round 2, you know.
They would never finish. We'd be doing round 347 and we'd still have more to talk about. That's the problem.
Rabbi Jacobson, don't do a round 2, because by 2, dogma always sets in.
I would love to, though.
Good point. Good point. Like they say,
Well,
spontaneous
thank y'all, everybody.
dancing at 9 p.m. Right.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to speak and to share my truth. That's all I have. I don't know anything about the Jewish faith that would be enough to even talk about it. I do know that God has blessed me to be able to have people just like you today, to be able to share my experience, strength, and hope, and have faith in humanity. So when I started negatively, I wanted you to know that I have faith in humanity, that I have to walk through certain aspects that people will call, oh, you're just being political. Oh, you're just this. Oh, you're just that. And that can be traumatizing to people too, when we negate the realities of what's going on around us. Well, let's just not talk about it. Sexual abuse in the clergy, all these other things that come about. I think that it's, we need to have a safe place like today to talk about that, and then to be able to share with each other what our experience, strength, and hope is. I think that's the magic of the 12-step fellowship. Even Bill and Doc Bob were shunned when they were bringing in these alcoholics into their homes. That's why they started Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm real grateful that their efforts weren't in vain because of their work. And we're piggybacking on that. I have a good life. I don't know about y'all. You've been sharing about your life, so it seems like you're living a good life too, because of what was brought to us in the Fellowship of Recovery, to give us a place where we can talk about our imperfections and seek spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Thank you for a good evening. Appreciate it, Shanna, for the invite.
RJ, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You were referring to a book by Lois something?
Yeah, it's called Lois Remembers. And Lois is the wife of Bill Wilson. And I really, in my opinion, she was the bread and butter of the fellowship. I mean, she stayed with Bill, you know, during real difficult times of his alcoholism, and then real difficult times of him not working during the times of getting Alcoholics Anonymous started. So thank you for asking that. And if you'd like, just email me, guys, and I will tell you about all the resources that I use with these different religions of the 12 steps, both with God or without God. Doesn't matter to me. I don't lose anything. I don't gain anything. I just give.
Awesome. Thank you. I look forward to reading that book.
Thank you.
Concluding remarks.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you all being here tonight. I mean, there was a lot of people here, so I appreciate you taking the time tonight and tuning in. And, you know, Eli, I love that closing story about your friend that, you know, questioning about being a gay male, because I went to treatment 31 years ago with this guy that was from the Hispanic community. And he was born with a vagina and a penis. And his family thought that they should make him a male. And he, in every core of his being, he knew he should have been a female. And because of his religion, the toxic God that he was brought up with, he ended up committing suicide because he knew that in his religion, he couldn't be right being a gay male. And, you know, I don't believe that God makes anyone wrong. You know, I don't care a penis, a vagina, I don't care what you have or what you're attracted to as a gay male. I mean, that was one of the most traumatic things I ever had to go through in my entire life, is crying and pleading and begging God, why did you make me wrong? Why did you make me different? I don't want to be this way. Please change me. And, you know, so many times wanting to die because I couldn't understand why God would make me different. And that was the toxic God. And so I'm really grateful that you brought that up, because, you know, a lot of people do commit suicide over that one. And I don't believe God makes anyone wrong. I mean, if I had a choice, you know, I would have chose to been straight if growing up. I have my cousin's 2-year-old cousin, 2 years old boy. She has an older son, a younger daughter, and he's in the middle. And since he was 2, he kept grabbing at his penis and saying, I don't want this. I don't want this. This isn't right. This isn't right. And he wants to dress in girls' clothes. And his brother, his older brother, is very masculine, like playing sports. And, you know, and now he's 10 years old. His brother's 12. And, you know, the father is from an Italian heritage that's saying, you did something wrong to my cousin. You brought him up wrong. You did something wrong as a mother. But this kid wouldn't have been able to do that at 2 years old. So I don't think God makes any mistakes. I think God made everyone perfect the way they are. And this has just been an open awareness for me tonight to see that the balance is so necessary. You know, not only for my teachings, but for me, myself, the balance is necessary. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you, Ken. Faith, do you want to end off with anything?
Yeah, first off, I just want to thank all the panelists. As I was coming onto the webinar, I've been on maternity leave. I turned to my husband, I said, I haven't felt particularly spiritual or particularly religious. And so I've just felt very overwhelmed. So I hope I have something to say. And he said to me, he said, you just experienced the most spiritual and religious event anybody could go through by having a child. You'll do great. And I'm gonna get emotional, but it's not just the hormones, it's also this topic in general. He was so right, because really the essence of, I think, the goal of religion and then the essence of spirituality is the unity, or the oneness that we have as humans, and just in this existence in the universe, on the world. There's an interconnected oneness that we're all experiencing, and anytime that there's a life affirming action, what we're doing is bringing more of God's will, because life, or light, and positivity, or creation is the essence of one of the principles of God. And what we've created as a panel, what we create at Chrysalis Way, what we create in our individual lives, what I've had the opportunity to create, all of these things are just bringing more of that, what Rabbi was talking about, that holiness into the world, and creating more of that oneness, and creating more of that life. So I'm very, very grateful that, we got to do this panel. I'm glad I said yes, even though I doubted myself. And I'm really, really hopeful that we'll get to continue this conversation, because the more we can create hope and positivity, and the more lives that we might be able to impact and save. And that's really the goal, why we started Chrysalis Way, and why we continue to do these webinars.
Thank you, Faith. Ellie, Rabbi Jacobson, do you want to say something or end off?
Ellie?
You keep deferring to me.
I respect you more than you know.
We'll say the best for last. So, someone mentioned Brene Brown earlier, and it's very triggering for me, because she still has a few more views on her TED Talk than I have. So if we can team up on her tonight, help me. Anyway, just messing. I'm grateful for this, Shauna. Good way to start the week. I was participating in a lot of such webinars, some of my own as well, at the beginning of the pandemic, and I slowly slipped away from them. And I'm grateful to do it, because it clears one's head and gets one focused for sure. So I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to speak and share my message. And congratulations on on the birth of your child recently, Faith.
You too, Ellie.
Thank you. I didn't do the work. But I will say this. I'll say this very interesting. Leading up to the birth of my son, I had multiple dreams about what I should name him, and connected to the name of the child. And eventually it led to the name of the child. When I shared this story with religious people, they looked at me like I was a kook. But when I share the story of dreams coming to me about the name of my child with people who are not religious, they didn't have such a problem with it. So maybe Rabbi Jacobson can help me understand this. But almost uniformly, there's been very few religious people who I've mentioned this story to, of the couple of dreams that I've had about the name of my child, and looked at me like I was standing with both feet on the ground.
Beautiful. I also congratulate you, Faith, Mazel Tov, for the birth. And no question, the most spiritual thing possible is the birthing of a child and the caring of a child. People think that spirituality is all about fireworks and glamour and glitz. No, it's the little moments, those little moments where you just stare at your little child, and there's something that's conveyed that will shape this child's life, that in a way speaks to the soul of the child. I don't know of anything more spiritual than that, to be very honest. Unfortunately, spirituality has turned into almost a commodity. So, yeah, I wanted to just conclude with a short story. I'll make it short because of the time. This was a story I shared, a parable I shared with a woman who grew up in a very religious community and left it all and became a Zen Buddhist, moved to the West Coast. And she rejected, in her words, she told me that her soul was asphyxiated. That was the word she used, asphyxiated by the religious world in which she lived. Anger, fear, everything was negative. Child of Holocaust survivors. So she said religion was just very toxic. and she found her God elsewhere. So I shared with her the following parable, and I once heard somewhere, I'm not even sure where. I think it really captures the theme of this evening well, about spirituality and religion. That when God created the nightingale, a bird with a beautiful voice, so the nightingale would be perched on a branch at dusk, serenading into the night, and all the creatures would be delighted by her song. But the nightingale came to God and said, "But God, you gave me a beautiful voice for which I thank you, but I need you to give me something to protect myself from predators, because I may be perched on the branch and a predator who's hungry for a dinner, for a meal, will be attracted. So give me something to protect myself from my enemies." So God offered the bird a beak, a razor sharp beak, and the bird inspected the merchandise. Not from me. Too ugly for a beautiful bird like me. So then God offered the bird claws, sharp claws, another form of defense. And again, rejected. Finally, God said to the bird, "Okay, I'll give you wings." Wings. The bird never saw wings before and said to God, "I don't understand. You're the master of the universe. You created it with such profound design. I have enough body weight to carry with me. You're giving me these extra 2 pieces of dead weight, will just weigh me down further, and it'll be more difficult to escape from my enemies." And God, of course, said, "No, little bird. These are called wings. You learn to use them, they'll allow you to soar and fly to places that you can never reach on your own, and allow you to escape any predator." So I told this woman, and I say it also to all of us, when you look at the rituals of religion on their own, it's a lot of weight, a lot of responsibility, minutia, details. I mean, when anyone, especially in Judaism, familiar with the laws of Passover, I mean, it's like the perfect OCD holiday. Detail, detail, detail. And you could ask yourself, what do I need all this for? It's a lot of heavy weight. What spirituality adds is it teaches you that the weight is wings. And although it makes you weigh a little more, but when you know that you can soar and fly with them to places that you could never reach without those so-called traditions, then it's well worth it, because you don't feel the burden, you feel the transcendence. And I think that really is what we're trying to achieve here, a fusion of both, recognizing, yes, growth and transcendence and soaring, there's a price to be paid. You need to have commitment. You need to commit to different traditions, whatever tradition you have that grounds you. But at the same time, don't see it as weight, see it as wings that allow you to soar and fly. So I want to thank you, Shana. I want to thank all of you. Beautiful to be here with you. You know, it's in this polarized climate, it's beautiful to be able to just be able to talk about things that matter, the real things that shape our lives, instead of all the hype and hysteria out there. It's very purifying, and I hope it helped everybody. And I really, Shana, again, for making this happen, and Ellie and Faith and RJ and you came in a little later. Your first name slipped my name.
Ken.
Ken, sorry. Ken, and of course, Shana, thank you. And may this be a springboard for much more growth. May we soar and reach beyond heaven itself.
Thank
Just
you.
keep flapping.
You say I'm gonna rope you in again. So thank you, and thank you to everyone. Ellie, RJ, Faith, Rabbi, and Ken. You guys have made it. You've made it what it is, and I know that this conversation could not have happened without all of you. So thank you for all of that, and I'm looking forward to another one.